New global emissions data has just been released, and hidden inside the numbers is a surprising signal about where the planet is actually making progress. Each month, I break down the latest emissions data from the Climate Trace project, which uses satellites and AI to track global emissions in near real time. And in this video, we look at three things. First, what the latest global emissions numbers actually show. Second, which countries are cutting emissions and which ones are increasing them. And third, the one sector that just delivered the biggest emissions drop this year. Stick around. If you've ever tried to read a climate report, you'll know the feeling. Page after page of billions of tons, fractional percentages, and complex graphs that somehow make the most important question harder to answer. Is the world actually moving in the right direction? The reality is that raw climate data can be a bit overwhelming. But when you step back and look at the patterns, the story becomes much clearer. So instead of drowning in numbers, let's zoom out and look at what the December 2025 emissions data actually tells us about the direction the global system is moving towards. Let's start with a planetary snapshot. In December 2025, humanity emitted roughly 5.21 billion tons of CO2 equivalent. And that is a 0.05% decrease compared to December 2024. Now, that might sound tiny, but in a system this large, even small changes matter. It means that at least for this month, the global emissions curve has stopped accelerating. But there's a catch. While carbon dioxide emissions edged downwards, methane emissions actually increased slightly, rising by 0.02%. Methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas in the short term, which means this small increase shouldn't be overlooked. So the overall picture at the planetary level is mixed. The global emissions engine may be slowing slightly, but it's definitely not turning around yet. Think of it like a massive cargo ship. It is cumbersome and it takes a long time to change direction. And right now, the ship may have eased off the throttle, but it's still moving forward, carried by inertia. Now, let's zoom in one level deeper. Which countries are actually driving those changes? The largest emitter on Earth remains China, and they are responsible for roughly 1.52 billion tons of CO2 equivalent in December 2025. But China's emissions declined by about 0.6% compared to last year. That might sound modest, but given the scale of China's economy, it represents a reduction of over 9 million tons of emissions. The United States also saw a small decrease, cutting emissions by 0.22% year over year. And the European Union recorded the largest drop among the major economies, reducing emissions by 1.59%. If the EU were counted as a single country, it would actually rank as the fourth largest emitter on Earth. That decline is significant. But the picture isn't uniform. In India, emissions actually increased by 1.34%. And in Russia, emissions rose by 0.33%. Meanwhile, Indonesia also recorded a small increase. So the global effort still looks a bit like a group project. Some of the biggest players are starting to reduce emissions, but others are still adding new pages to the problem. But the most interesting signal in this month's data aren't the countries, it is the sectors. When you break down emissions by industry, a very different pattern emerges. There are three sectors that actually increased emissions compared to December last year. These are power generation, transportation, and waste. Together, these sectors continue to push emissions upwards. But several other sectors moved in the opposite direction. Emissions actually declined in agriculture, fossil fuel operations, manufacturing, and buildings. And this is where the most surprising shift happens. The building sector saw emissions falling by 2.14% in a single year, and that is the largest reduction in the entire dataset. Buildings include everything from homes and offices to heating systems and air conditionings, which means that improvements in energy efficiency, better insulation, and smarter building technologies are already having a measurable impact. And this is a bit like someone who has finally started eating healthier. The overall lifestyle hasn't completely changed yet, but one important habit has improved dramatically. Now let's zoom in even further. Emissions aren't just national, they're also urban. According to the latest data, the cities with the highest emissions in December 2025 were again Shanghai, Tokyo, New York City, Houston, and Los Angeles. These large metropolitan areas concentrate enormous amounts of energy use, transportation, and also industrial activity. But cities are also where some of the largest changes are happening. Emissions increased significantly in cities like Doha, Dubai, and Melbourne. But on the other hand, other urban areas, including Seoul and Busan, recorded some of the largest emissions declines. And cities are often where climate policy becomes tangible. And by that I mean policies like public transport systems, like building efficiency programs, and urban energy transitions themselves. Which means that urban areas may become, or perhaps already are, the front line of global emissions reductions. So what should we take away from all of this? In December 2025, data shows something small but important. Climate progress doesn't show up as a dramatic breakthrough. It more often appears as small shifts across a massive system. And right now, one of the sectors showing the clearest improvements is buildings. So here's one simple action you can take today. You can lower your thermostat by just 1 degree or improve insulation where possible, even by just closing the curtains at night. Or switch an old energy light bulb for an efficient new one. And these might just feel like very small actions, but collectively, they're exactly the kind of changes that are already showing up in the global data. Because the planet doesn't change through a single decision. It changes through millions of small ones. So thank you for joining me today. See you again soon.